Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and today we're going to be doing an educational follow-up to Mackenzie's survivor story. And Mackenzie's episode wasn't about one incident. It was really a story of 27 years of living inside coercive control, the slow erosion of self, the quiet normalization of abuse, and survival strategies that kept her and her children going. And in this follow-up episode, I'm going to be discussing the core themes of her story, the fear, obligation, guilt, and shame that kept her trapped. I'm going to give you an analogy that explains why staying wasn't a choice and what we hope the healing looks like after survival. But before we get to that, if you want to be a guest on our Survivor Story episodes, go to our website, narcissistapocalypse.com, click on the guest form button at the top of the page, or email us at narcissistapocalypse@pm.me. And we also have a newsletter, and our newsletter has a free downloadable workbook about this episode. And there's also 5 questions about this episode in this newsletter that we have. It's a new newsletter. Everyone is really enjoying our newsletter. It is completely free. It's very helpful. And, go to our website, narcissistapocalypse.com. Sign up today on our website. And so for the context of this episode, for anyone who's listening to this and hasn't listened to that episode yet, that'll be in our show notes. Everything we just mentioned is going to be in our show notes. Mackenzie shared her experience of surviving 27 years of coercive control and emotional abuse within her marriage. The relationship began in high school with love bombing, savior language, and guilt-inducing attachment. And there was a lot of guilt-inducing stuff in there. And over time, that devotion turned into isolation, control, and shame. And there was shame that Mackenzie brought into this relationship as well. And throughout the marriage, Mackenzie endured nitpicking, financial and emotional abuse, double standards, caretaking, and really a relentless minimization of her own needs. And despite, maintaining this facade of normalcy, because that's what was going on, Mackenzie and her children were living in this survival mode. And they were bracing for moods, they were managing volatility, and waiting for moments of relief whenever they could get them. And her husband controlled her appearance, weaponized guilt, played the victim, and really escalated verbal aggressions, particularly, when the children got older and started to become more independent, they were really put in their place. And ultimately, Mackenzie found clarity, validation, a path forward. She finally had enough distance and support and self-trust to see the patterns that were going on to finally break free. And one thing about Mackenzie's story is that I recorded this episode a long time ago. And at that time, I was inexperienced at doing my job, and the framework for her story wasn't 100% there. It was there, but I didn't really delve into her childhood more when I should have, particularly, where the insecurities came from, the societal pressures to have a boyfriend came from. And there was an intense, rebellion against her parents' concerns. And that had to have come from somewhere. And I didn't dive into that at the time because I wasn't experienced at what I was doing it. But there was something there that helped create the norms and shape the rebelliousness, which then created a shame of, my parents were right. So there's deeper dynamics that were at play that were going on during the adolescence era of her life. So now we're going to start here with the key themes. And the key themes in Mackenzie's story: coercive control as disguised as care. There's love bombing and devotion that later became restriction and monitoring. Fear, obligation, guilt, and shame as control mechanisms are a big theme in this story. These pressures that narrowed her options over time. And then we have financial control and power imbalance, dependence created through caretaking, interrupted career paths, and intimidation. survival mode as a long-term state. And, Mackenzie was just trying to make things work, managing moods, waiting for reprieves. There's enough reprieves in there at certain points to get those reprieves to kind of continue going. The impact on children is a big theme. When relief was gone, she saw the children get better, and then tension happened again when he returned. So you could see the impact on children in those states, and there was also physical abuse that was going on. And then another big theme, and the last theme we have here, is healing through clarity and self-forgiveness. And that's just a big thing for Mackenzie, is self-forgiveness, giving herself grace for everything that had occurred. And it's going to be like a slow process of rebuilding, and getting there is a big thing, getting rid of the shame and everything, and, understanding that you were in a war. So the analogy that we have here for Mackenzie's story, and maybe this analogy will really sit with you and resonate with you, and it's called the slow narrowing of a path. So imagine your life as a wide open path. When the relationship starts, the path feels normal. You're walking forward. There are options. You can step left. You can step right. You can turn around if you want. But over time, things begin to narrow. Fear shows up first, not as danger, but as consequences. If you step too far to one side, there's yelling. If you speak up, things escalate. If you push back, the ground becomes unstable. So you'll learn where it is safe to walk on this path. Then obligation moves in. The path narrows even further. Marriage, kids, finances, responsibility. You're not just walking for yourself anymore. And turning around doesn't just affect you anymore. Then guilt and shame close in. You tell yourself you should be stronger, smarter, more grateful. You've already come this far. Stopping now would mean admitting something very painful. So you keep walking. And eventually, the path becomes so narrow that movement feels impossible. You're not choosing to stay. You're just surviving where you are. And the hardest part, from the outside, people still see you moving forward. They don't see the path disappeared behind you a long, long time ago. So Mackenzie didn't stay because she didn't know something was wrong. She stayed because fear narrowed the ground beneath her, obligation made turning back feel dangerous, and guilt convinced her she didn't deserve another path. Leaving didn't start with a leap. It started with clarity. So hopefully that resonates with a lot of you out there. And hopefully, sadly, this might resonate with a lot of people out there, but hopefully this can validate your experience and give you something to grab onto. Like, yes, that was my story. And up next in this educational episode, as we do in all of our educational episodes, we covered the fog, the fear, obligation, and guilt, and we include shame in here as well. And we'll tell you about the cross combo ones as well, if one can be, in a couple of categories. So fear of his anger and volatility. Mackenzie never knew what would set him off. Her appearance could have been money, plans, or perceived disobedience. Explosive yelling and unpredictability, created constant hypervigilance for her. Holidays and family events were routinely preceded by blowups. So there's this fear of his anger and volatility. And next up, we have fear of financial instability. So on this one, long periods as a stay-at-home parent and financial intimidation made leaving feel really unsafe for Mackenzie, and it made it also feel like it was unrealistic. And up next, we have fear of being wrong or a failure. And this is fear of, proving her parents right, fear of admitting that the marriage was a mistake, fear of judgment was going on here. And this is an overlap with shame. And it is rooted in how Mackenzie believed she would be seen. And up next, we have fear of escalation if she challenged him. And resistance of things made things worse. So, this became also feeling like she was obligated to keep the peace, to like maintain the role as much as she could. And up next, we have fear of the unknown. And Mackenzie had never lived independently as an adult at all and didn't trust that she could make it on her own. So that was a big fear for her as well. And up next, we have the obligations. So obligation number 1 on our list is obligation to keep the marriage intact. Early on, when it came to obligation, there's a lot of stuff happened early on in this relationship before they were married. Promise ring. She felt obligated to him. He was a provider during the marriage, felt obligated to him as well during that. When he wanted to go to therapy, couples therapy, it looked like he was trying. There was an obligation that Mackenzie felt right there where she was thinking, well, we've come this far. Now he's going to go do this. I'm obligated to see this through. So that's a big one in this relationship, that obligation. There was also obligation to protect his emotional state. So early on with suicidal ideation and later with job distress, and she's just made to feel responsible for his well-being in these situations. She's obligated to take care of his emotions. This can also be fear. Fear of what would happen if she didn't. What would happen to him? Would he completely fall apart? His life is in my hands. And there's a guilt aspect to all these things as well. And then there's obligation to provide stability for the children. And Mackenzie believed that staying was the only choice that she had, that there was a personal cost to it, that, she was doing it. She was doing her best for the kids. And then there's the obligation to be the caretaker of the household. And she did everything. She carried the household, emotional labor, physical labor, the stress of the household. It wasn't being picked up in another way. So she's kind of in this world now, doing what she needs to do to survive, for her kids to survive. And she's taking care of everything. And once you're taking care of everything and you're exhausted, the world becomes smaller and it's harder to fight back, and you just kind of go along with things, especially when there's reprieves in this marriage. And then, as mentioned before, obligation to give him chances. And I kind of mentioned that earlier, I did mention it earlier, but promises of change, counseling, and being in the relationship that long, as mentioned before, just want to give him that other chance, felt obligated they had to do it, kept the relationship going on longer. Guilt is also part of this. If she said no to that, how would she be seen? And she would feel cruel. It wouldn't be nice of her to do that. He deserves a chance. So guilt comes into play on this one as well. And then in our last one here, we have guilt and shame. And the first one here is we have shame for allowing the abuse, believing that she should have known better. So that's a big thing that's keeping her in the relationship. That shame, embarrassment that this has been going on for so long, doesn't want anyone to know, so the relationship can carry on, because to admit that is painful. And then in the relationship, there's guilt in the relationship about wanting more. And she stated that in the episode, that she wanted more. But there's this guilt that is in there, like, do I deserve more? Do I really deserve that? And shame would come up here as well from her past of, do I really deserve more than what I get now? Because when she started the relationship, getting a boyfriend was a big thing. And other things that might have occurred in her past will really start to come into play here, that she really didn't feel worthy of a relationship. So wanting more gave her guilt, but it all originally came from shame because she doesn't feel like she deserved more than what she got. And then when it comes to her husband's job and being a provider, there's guilt tied to that. He's a good provider. Why should I want to leave? So there's guilt there that in one way he does, quote unquote, the job as being a provider, but everything else is not just lacking. There's abuse going on, emotional abuse, verbal abuse. Children are getting physical abuse. So those things are going on, and that's guilt right there tied to his, I guess, sacrifices. If he does have any sacrifice, it is that he is a good provider. And then there's shame around the facade that's been created and having this marriage to the outside world that looks, to the most part, normal or good. But inside, you've been living in a completely different way for a very long time. And there's shame that is around admitting that this wasn't true and that you've been, in a way, lying to everyone for a very long time, pretending that everything was okay. And there's a lot of shame attached to that. And there's a fear attached to that. You're being exposed and you might be judged, and you don't want those things to happen. No one wants to feel judged. And the last thing on our list happened in the aftermath, which was a guilt during the separation and divorce of not asking for more. This can also be a fear of retaliation, fear of escalation. But in the divorce process, she didn't ask for anything. She wanted to be over. She wanted to be clean. But now, further along down the line here, she really wishes that she asked for more money, because it would have been useful, and he got what he wanted. And this is, she feels guilty about doing that. And there's a fear based around this one as well. And that is our fear, obligation, and guilt. And all of these layers here work together to keep Mackenzie subjugated for a very long time in coercive control in this relationship. So takeaways from this episode. And we're probably, hammering this home a little bit too much today, but we're doing it anyway. Takeaways. Coercive control accumulates. So it really didn't arrive just all at once. And it started one by one by one by one. And it's confusing. It doesn't feel normal while it's happening, but over time you realize this is clearly abusive as what it's going on, but it accumulates over a period amount of time. It's not definitive in day one. So it's hard to see until it's a lot of times too late. And then another takeaway from this survivor story of Mackenzie's is staying is about survival. And she just adapting to what was going on within the relationship. She's not approving of what's going on in the relationship, but she's adapting to survive. And she's just in survival mode for a long time in this relationship. And the circumstances of the relationship provided a real perfect recipe for that to occur because of how many reprieves she was getting, whether it be deployment for military or deployment for work, that there were a lot of reprieves so you can kind of rest comfortably until the next war was going to begin when he got home. Another big takeaway here is the public image, kind of maintaining that facade and the fear of people finding out that hides the private thing that is going on, and it's a harmful thing. And to understand that the really nice Instagram type of photo of your family in some ways is providing you safety, but in other ways it is providing you a lot of harm, and it's not safe because everyone thinks that your life behind the scenes is perfect. Questions might not be asked. I know it's a kind of a double-edged sword. In one way, you're doing it for safety, but in other ways, it's causing help not to come because no one knows that anything is wrong. And then the last one on our list is clarity, a lot of it comes after the relationship or way further down within the relationship from when it started, and that's okay. And it's when you have the capacity in you to really understand things, and that means you might be getting reprieves to like start taking things in and understanding what's going on. Sometimes you're in such a war for so long that it's impossible to get clarity because you're surviving every day. So healing and getting out, it's not a linear path. There's no timeline on it. It's when you have the capacity to really start to understand things in clarity of what's going on to be able to make decisions, especially when there's no physical abuse going on and it's really hard to tell what has happened and you're living in this prison of coercive control. And now we have 5 goals for Mackenzie going forward, and these could be 5 goals for you too. And number 1 is to rebuild trust in her perception. Treat her instincts as valid instincts, valid data. 2 is to like release the misplaced responsibility, separate who they were in your role and that you weren't responsible. They're an abuser. They're the one that is responsible for their actions. 3, heal guilt and self-blame. There's a lot of self-blame going on. Mackenzie saying, I should have known better. Maybe try to replace that with I did the best I could. 4, strengthen your boundaries. And that's for everyone. Do your best you can. It's a very difficult thing to do, but strengthening your boundaries is a big goal that we have for Mackenzie going forward. And number 5, build a life defined by calm and not endurance, not taking all of these things on. Peace should be the regular. It shouldn't be your reward. Having peace should be all the time. So those are our 5 big goals for Mackenzie and maybe for you going forward as well. And before we leave today, I'm just going to do this one letter to all of you out there. So if you're listening to this and wondering why you stayed as long as you did, this is for you. So you didn't stay because you didn't know. You stayed because leaving wasn't safe. It wasn't safe emotionally. It wasn't safe financially. It wasn't safe psychologically or relationally as well. You adapted. You learned where danger lived. You learned how to minimize harm. You learned how to survive. And to me, that shows intelligence under these really warlike circumstances. It's not weakness. You may carry shame for not leaving sooner. You may carry guilt for your children. You may look back and wonder how you didn't even see it. But clarity, as we mentioned before, doesn't really arrive during the chaos of everything. It arrives when the nervous system finally gets a break. So if you're still inside it and surviving, remember that you're not broken. And if you're out and grieving the time that you lost, just remember that you're not late. And if you're healing and you're still angry, just know that you're not failing. And there is, no timeline on any of this at all. There's just like one moment that you realize that what you went through wasn't love. You deserve more. You deserve better. Lasting out a marathon, sure, you did it. You proved that you could. But you deserve more than that. And when that moment comes and understanding that in whatever form it takes, always remember you're allowed to choose yourself over anybody else. So I hope everyone takes that to heart and remembers that. And I hope you enjoyed this follow-up episode, educational follow-up of Mackenzie's story. And just to remind everyone, once again, we have a new newsletter. We'll have a free educational workbook to do reflections on about Mackenzie's story. This one's going to really focus on the fear, obligation, and guilt of what Mackenzie went through. And as well, within our newsletter, we have 5 things, and there will be some resources in there as well. And our 5 things might be things to remember, things to like think about what's going on in your relationship, maybe something that happened in Mackenzie's story that we want you to focus on or think that you should focus on. You don't have to, take our advice or read it all or do all of the little exercises, but they're there for you. So you can go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, sign up to our newsletter today. And that is it for today's follow-up episode. So for myself and Mackenzie, once again, we hope you have a good night.